Hello fellow miniature painters, I'm Kuro Cleanbrush, and today I want to teach you how to blend by layering. Well, alright then, I suppose it's time to get down to it and really learn this technique. So first off, you're going to need something to paint, obviously. And I have two identical little shields that I have already base coated over white with 3 or 4 layers of Reaper's MSP, that's Master Series Paint, Ultramarine Blue. And as you can see here, I have all of the paints that I'm going to use for this technique laid out. Oftentimes I find that choosing your paints is one of the keys before you even get going to getting good blends. So I try to base what I'm doing usually around a Reaper triad if I can, and I've chosen the Ultramarine triad, the Ultramarine Shadow, Ultramarine Blue, and Ultramarine Highlight. But then those are great, but they don't push the shadow far enough and they don't push the highlight far enough usually. So generally I take a Reaper triad and add a dark liner. In this case I chose a blue liner because I'm working with blue, go figure. And then an off-white at the top. And depending on what you're working with, you could go all the way to white. But in this case I chose a blue off-white, known as Ghost White. And then I took all those paints and set them up on my wet palette, as you can see here. The top row are all the pure colors. So we go from blue liner, ultramarine shadow, all the way up to the Ghost White. And then the second row are mixes between the two. So the bottom row, they're usually half and half until I get up between the ultramarine highlight and the Ghost White. Because I have generally found that usually if you're going to have some difficulty with the blending, it's going to be on the higher, brighter colors. They just show up so much better. So therefore, I generally go 2/3, 1/3, and then 2/3, 1/3. So 2 blue, 1 white, then 2 white, 1 blue. And that should be enough. I'm not guaranteeing that this will work, so we'll keep an eye on it, and if necessary, we'll mix half and halves between those two things. Reaper's paints are kind of designed with the idea in mind that you're going to base coat with your mid-tone, whichever one you choose that to be, and then you're going to build up or build down to your highlights and your shadows, respectively. So before I show you how to blend right, I want to show you how to blend wrong so that you can understand kind of how much of an important factor the angle of your brush is during all these things. So we're going to start by layering, just like we're going to do in the finished product, but layering, doing stripes, and we're going to do stripes from top to bottom. And I'm going to decide that, just totally arbitrarily speaking, that this is going to be our highlight side and this is going to be our shadow side, right? And I'll start layering it up to meet that. But I'm going to do it taking my brush and going parallel with how the light gradient would fall. You'll see what I'm meaning here in just a second if that's all unclear. So I like to work down to my shadows first, and then I go up to my highlights second. So we're going to start with the shadows. So now I take the 50/50 ultramarine blue and ultramarine shadow, and I'm going to start, hopefully keeping my hands out of the way, I'm going to give a little bit of room for the previous color, and I'm going to start dragging down a strip. So you can see that, not too big of a color change. And I'm going to really extend that down most of the way. I don't have to worry about getting it all the way to the bottom because, hey, that's where our other colors are going to go. Our other shadow colors are going to go. But we'll start to extend it down. All right, so that's a reasonable color decision to make there. Clean my brush, load it up with the next color. So this is pure ultramarine shadow. So now I go to the edge of, let's make sure the camera can focus on this here. I'm going to help it out a little bit. There we go. We go to just past the edge of the last color and start covering that up and then bring it down towards the edge. Not bad. We can see, hey, we're starting to get some kind of a blend going here. And now I'm going to go and grab a little bit of the 50/50 Ultramarine Shadow Blue liner. Same deal as before. Gonna cover up part of our last color. This time I'm going to go about half because we're getting near the edge. And making sure that's still in focus. And if it looks like it's really dark, that's because it is. It's not just because of the shadows. You can tell that no matter how I hold it in the light, it's just really dark, which is what we want, right? But we want to push it just still even a little bit darker than that. So I'm going to give it a half second to dry. I live in a very arid climate, which is part of the reason why I chose to learn how to layer instead of wet blend or true brush blend, because I just can't keep the paint wet enough long enough for it to matter. So I kind of have to do layering. And now with pure blue liner, just going to hit the very edge here. So not bad. I mean, we can definitely tell it's starting to get very dark, right? Now I'm going to flip it around so I can hold it better, and I'm going to paint the highlights. So once again, starting with the 50/50 between your first highlight and your mid-tone. So in that case, that would be a half ultramarine blue and a half ultramarine highlight. I'm going to leave a little space again. No, that's not going to work. Let's try this angle. There we go. And I'm going to start dragging that down. All right, so this is very close in color. Sometimes you'll notice that your first couple layers of a new what am I trying to say? A new highlight or shade color. You're like, well, I'm not doing anything, right? And generally, if you see that, that's probably a good thing. So just let the blend be nice and subtle. I think I'm running into a little bit of texture. That's why I think it's not laying down, but it's going down just fine. All right, so you can't really see that we even did anything, right? That's okay. Sometimes you just mix up a mix that works like that, and that'll just make our blends that much more subtle. Now we're going to go with the ultramarine highlight. So I probably should have said that when I was mixing up my paints. Let's see here. Once again, I got to get a good angle for you. And when I was mixing up my paints, I made sure that they were plenty watery. You want your paints to be fairly thin when you're doing the layering, because that will allow them to be semi-transparent for you, right? So it's not a bad deal for them to be pretty watery. Generally speaking, for about 2 drops of paint, I use a brush full of water. Now, what is a brush full? That is a very complex question. So, in other words, it's a measurement that means nothing. So, just try to make sure your paint flows. I'll show you a little bit more of the consistency of the paint once I move on to the good one. All right, once again, half covered. And bring it down, bring it down. I think you can see that fairly well. You can see we're definitely, I'm going to flip it back around. You can see this is starting to look right, but it's still just a little bit off, right? And that is because you can still see these clear lines between all of the different colors, right? And that just, so the basic shape of where the highlights is at is correct, but our eye just doesn't accept this as being a smooth transition because it can see the lines. I'm going to put the next higher highlight on here. Even more. Remember how I said that your highlights tend to be trickier than your shadows? I think this is showcasing that well right here. And then finally, a little bit of the ghost white right on that edge. Try not to give you too much glare here. And generally you want to control this, keep it really fine. Alright, there you have it. Looks, all in all, not half bad. Pretty good for like a gaming piece or something like that. We can definitely tell there's supposed to be a nice transition, and it goes from pretty bright, if the camera will let me, to extremely dark. But we could make this smoother, right? So let's go ahead and put this one away. Grab out a new shield, also base coated in ultramarine blue. And this time, I'm going to paint using the exact same colors, but all I'm going to do is, instead of taking my paintbrush and going from top to bottom, I'm going to pull towards the bottom with my paintbrush. And the reason for that is this. Let me get a little bit of paint on my brush here. I'm going to show you my fingernail. When, if I can here, when a paintbrush sets down on something, and when it pulls up, it leaves different amounts of paint due to the nice sharp tip on these paintbrushes. Let me see if I can get a good dash for you here. It's hard to see, but you can, actually borderline impossible. But take my word for it that if you can see a little bit closer, you'll see that more paint is left when you remove your paintbrush from the surface than when you set it down. Therefore, if your paint's fairly watery, you can set down a thinner layer closer to where you're trying to blend, and a thicker layer where you don't care about the blend so much because you're already into the bulk of what the color would be. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Once again, I like to work from shadows to highlights, right? So we're going to go ahead and get a little bit of that 50-50 ultramarine blue and ultramarine shadow, and we're going to give this a try. So I got to find an angle that works good for both of us here, and that looks about good. So I'm not worrying too much that there's a gap between my lines at this point, because I'm going to go back in and I'm going to fix that with a second layer of this stuff. We're just hitting it again. Let's see. Not bad. I'm going to get a little bit more coverage now, further to the bottom. But you can see I'm leaving a little bit, you can see if I angled it a little bit better. You can see I'm leaving a little bit of a jagged line here. And what we're doing is we're operating kind of on the same principle of camouflage. Camouflage helps to break up the silhouette of something with all kinds of angles and lines. And therefore, it's harder to detect hard edges, which are what your eye is looking for more so than the soft, jagged edges. So you can see already that that's a little bit better concealed than the first one. Now we're going to go back in with the next the next lower shade, and we're going to do something very similar. And now the one trick with this technique is it's harder to keep your lines straight as far as your gradient between dark and light even, but it's a small price to pay for the increased hiding of things, I think. So go through, get that edge nice and wavy. There we go. While that's drying, we'll get the next color on the paintbrush. Give this a shot. Which one was that? That was... Alright, we're down to 50-50 ultramarine shadow and liner. I would say let me know if you can't see anything very well, but that probably wouldn't work for real-time filming. And now the final shadow, pure blue liner. I'm gonna have to tilt this at quite the angle because it's hard for me to get my paintbrush down there. So I'm just gonna use my paintbrush at a little bit of an angle here. So it's not perfectly lined up with the surface like I'd like, but hey, that's okay. You're never going to, while painting a real miniature, always be able to get exactly the paintbrush angle that you want. So you kind of got to cheat a little bit, and you kind of got to say, hey, close enough. Now that is a much smoother looking blend. I'll put them side by side in the end so you can really compare them. Let's flip it over and do the same thing with the highlights. Remember to keep your paint fairly thin. I said I'd tell you a little bit more about that later, and I probably didn't get to that. So you can kind of see on my thumbnail how it's still fairly transparent. You can see through the paint. If you can't see through the paint, it's too opaque and it's never going to blend nicely. So just add a little bit more water. All right. Back to highlighting. This is our first highlight, so 50-50 between the two, and I'm going to start right about there. Once again, I really can't see this highlight, so but that's okay. That just means that we've got a nice transition between the colors. If your edge isn't looking quite right, just go back and play with the edge. Pull a little bit of, just do short little strokes on the edge and hide it a little bit better. Now we're going to jump up one more layer. All right. Hopefully you can still see here. And I'm going to start covering. Now, hopefully I'm going to get a blend that just will not work for me, so I can go back and show you how to fix areas where you followed your mixing right and it's just still not working. It's just still not looking right. Then what I like to do is I like to just take a small brush full of halfway between both of the layers that aren't working and work it along the edge, just side to side, because you can't really get the angle you want anymore, so just get your brush at a little bit of an angle and just zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. All right, that was 2 highlights. Third highlight. So now we're starting to add a little bit of white, so this might be a little stark. Let's try this. You might have to tween this, as the technique I was just describing can be called sometimes. Maybe, maybe not. It's a little stark, but I haven't really finished with it yet. Now, I can't tell if the picture is good enough for you to see that there's kind of little stripes. I don't want those stripes to still be evident, so I need to go through and fill things in a little bit more. The edge looks good. The edge looks pretty good, but I don't want to have stripes of a darker color running through my lighter color. So let's just go, and I'm going to flip it at a little bit more of an angle here, and we'll fill it in. Don't mess up your edge too much, but just fill in the middle of this highlight color. There we go. It's working better. more of a soft transition between the colors, not the hard transition we had last time. Okay. Next highest highlight. Once again, I have to use a little bit of angle on my brush because I can't reach that and you can't see that. So let's try this. Yeah, I think you should be able to see that. There we go. It's coming along pretty nicely. I should have maybe cleaned that mold line before I was demonstrating on this piece, but I didn't think it would be necessary. And finally, so that line that you're seeing is not a line of the paint, that is actually a mold line. If that helps encourage you that this technique works and not just making up success stories. All right. Ready? Let's put that final white highlight on it. Now I have a little bit of an angle to my brush, but as you can see, I'm still pulling down towards the edge. And this highlight I may not be able to get to blend very smoothly because of that mold line, because it's always going to look like the mold line is what the mold line is always going to produce a somewhat harsh contrast between the two. But there we go. I feel like that is a much smoother transition than this is. Reads very much better to the eye. And now, just so I can show you how to do it real quick, I'm still not in love with this transition. This one right here, right? So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to mix, that was my mid highlight. So it was somewhere between my first two highlights. So I'm going to get half a brush of that color, put it down somewhere, and get half a brush of the two colors on either side that aren't working. Clean my brush real quick. And I'm going to use a very watery little mixture of those two colors. And we're just going to pull it along the edge using the short little strokes that we talked about when you can't really reach something. So try. There we go. I think you can see that. I'm kind of just zigzagging the brush over the interface, relying on the transparency of the paint to help hide this for me. There we go. Now the next transition you're seeing is the next lower one. So, well, actually I guess it's the same one. I'm trying to think. So you can just clean it up. That's what blending is. Blending is getting your stuff roughly where you want it and then going and cleaning up all your edges. But I hope that has been enlightening to you and that you can use this for all of your miniature painting projects. So feel free to ask any questions you can think of and I will do my best to get you answers for them. Thanks a bunch and happy painting!